All right, we finally have done it. We've been in this unit all quarter. We're there. End of the Cold War. We left off after the timeline project with the détente ending. All right, and the Soviet Union is going to, and this was in the last set of notes also, is going to invade Afghanistan. Remember that détente is that period of relaxation between the two superpowers. Like, hey, things look like it's improving. And then the Soviets go and invade Afghanistan in 1979, and the U.S. ends the détente. All right, they go back and they start to reignite. This event's going to reignite the Cold War, because for a period it was kind of cooling off. They were opening trade, they were visiting each other, etc. And a guy that's gonna change things is Ronald Reagan. All right, he is a former Hollywood actor. If you've ever seen the movie Back to the Future, I was like, "Who's president?" It's like Ronald Reagan, the actor, which seems crazy that an actor would do it, but we've had Trump, and he was a reality TV star, so I guess it's not that crazy anymore. But at the time, it probably was. Reagan was got elected in 1980, became president in 81. Very anti-communist. Really wanted to reignite the Cold War. Wanted to. He didn't want to just contain communism. He wanted to surpass it. So he's going to really come back and try to reignite the Cold War. He often referred to, he didn't mince words. He's like, yeah, the Soviet Union, they're the evil empire. And so he really had a lot of bad things to say. And so what he's going to do, the way he's going to try to reignite the Cold War is by reigniting the arms race. He thinks that if we can get the Soviets to try to keep up with our spending, that they will fail. And he's going to reinstitute the arms race because they're not going to have the finances to be able to keep up. Develop newer type of weapons, and the Soviets are going to try to keep up with the spending. Reagan's going to increase military spending. He's going to introduce a neutron bomb, which can be basically it's a more effective. It can be more. It's like a limited nuclear weapon. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it doesn't have the blast power of a hydrogen bomb, but it has the radiation that can go out and wipe out an entire. It's like a smaller. It can affect a smaller area, and it's radiation, so it can go through like tanks. You can't really hide from it, and so it's a neutron bomb gets created. The Strategic Defense Initiative program, the Star Wars that you see over here to the side, that's where they basically were trying to create ways that they could shoot missiles with satellites out of the sky, and it wasn't really that close to a reality, but the fact that they were doing this really put the Soviet Union on edge, on alert. The effect of the Soviet Union, the economy was suffering. So the Soviet Union, they reinstitute their arms race as well. And they're spending millions, billions of dollars on weaponry they'll never use. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union, they're having basic food shortages, slicing a loaf of bread. And basic goods, because remember, in a communist society, that's really what the government wants to do. They want to provide for the basic needs of the people. They control what is being spent. They have half of their budget they're spending on weapons that they're never going to use, while meanwhile, the Soviet people don't even have enough, like the grocery stores are empty, their food, there's not enough food going around. So their economy really is going to suffer as a result of them spending all this money in the arms race to keep up with the United States. And so that's a huge reason why the Soviets are going to end up making changes. By the mid 1980s, the Soviet Union was struggling. They were entrenched in a war in Afghanistan. They had drugs and alcohol were prevalent. Industries and farms were outdated. The economy was declining. The most glaring incident occurred in Chernobyl. This is a little trailer for the movie that was created about the incident, but basically it was a nuclear reactor that it really highlighted the ineffective, the corruption, the lack of industry that they had when the nuclear reactor melted down at Chernobyl, and it created just an environmental disaster. And it really highlighted the need, the Soviet Union, they need to change. So you enter this guy, Mikhail Gorbachev. I almost called him Birthmark McGee, but I'm like, that's kind of mean. Then I said it anyway, so I guess I'm mean. Gorbachev was a reformer. He wants to shake things up a little bit. He wants to change some things within the Communist Party. He was reform-minded. He's like, all right, we'll make some changes. We're going to make some drastic changes. He's going to institute a couple things that are going to be something that we have to know. He's going to institute something called perestroika, a restructuring. He's going to allow for limited businesses, limited capitalism, so businesses can operate privately. And he's going to institute changes to the government, a restructuring of the government. He's going to start to allow for people to have a vote, elected officials. You can't really have this without this. You're going to have openness. People can have more freedom. They can have a voice. The Soviet Union is going to have elected officials. He's going to become the Soviet Union's first and last president. And so he's going to make these wide sweeping changes. Where typically in a communist society, there's not an openness. You can't speak out against the government. It's more iron fist. You have to fall in line. You can't own your own property. So he's willing to make these crazy changes. And like change, it was met with resistance within the Communist Party, so that kind of hindered some of it, who wanted to keep power over daily life. But Gorbachev pressed on to fix these issues. Gorbachev and Reagan became very close, awkwardly close. Put that photo on there just because I was like, that's weird. Like, hey, look like they're about to smooch. Gorbachev and Reagan agreed to destroy stockpiles of intermediate-range nuclear warheads, limit military spending, but they really did hit it off. Their relationship really was the first real positive relationship between a U.S. president and a Soviet leader to make changes. And so they agreed on several things. And so the Cold War is going to start to cool down. Now, some of the other reforms that are going to cause major issues. We talked about perestroika and glasnost. Those are big reforms. But Gorbachev is going to remove troops from Afghanistan, allow the dictatorship to fall. But the big one here is going to be that they are going to withdraw Soviet troops from Eastern Europe. All right, so he announced that our communist ideology should play a smaller role in foreign affairs, meaning we should be more open to trade. He wanted to institute this, people having more voice, more openness, and he said, we're going to take our troops and we're not going to get involved in Eastern Europe anymore. And Gorbachev basically said, hey, you need help putting down a rebellion? Nope, not happening here. Because every time you think about it, like in Czechoslovakia when they had issues, in Hungary, when we talked about there was a Hungarian revolt, when they tried to rebel, every time the Soviets just rolled their tanks in and were like, hey, what's going on here? Yeah, that's what I thought. Get back in line. Well, now Gorbachev's saying, we're not going to do that. All right, so if you want to stay communist, great, but it's going to be up to you. We will no longer be the ones that come in with the stick to get everybody back in line. So he didn't really plan, he didn't want to weaken the Soviet Union, but he wanted to strengthen it through reforms, but it had the opposite effect. Without the threat of Soviet tanks rolling in to squash a rebellion, Eastern European satellite states were like, finally, we're free. We can break free from our oppressive communist governments. And so one by one, these satellite states that have been created since they liberated them from the Nazis, Poland is going to start to break free. They're going to be the first one. Communists will defeat them. Remember, they have that glasnost and perestroika. They have free elections. The communist government's going to get voted out. You have Hungary in May of 1989. They are going to defeat the communists. You have East Germany is going to break free eventually. The Berlin Wall is going to come down. In 1991, it's going to be reunified. Czechoslovakia, after demonstrations and protests, they're going to name the guy that led the Prague Spring. They're going to put him back in power. He's going to become in charge. Romania, this was a brutal one. This one actually involved a lot of fighting. But in Romania, they actually had some violent protests. They actually killed the dictator in that one. But one by one, these dictators are going to fall. Democratic elections are going to outvote them. So in 1988, they stopped providing military aid. And by 1990, 1991, all these countries are no longer communist. Eastern Europe states began to reject communism. The pact became null. The end of the Warsaw Pact. It's over. Some of you guys don't even know who that is. That's Vince Carter. I'm old, so I know who he is, so I put him on there. The Soviet republics follow suit. All right, so the Soviet Union, this is confusing because the Soviet Union is actually made up of not only is it Russia, which is number 11 here, but it's made up of a bunch of tiny different nations as well, and some bigger nations like Ukraine, you've got Latvia, Lithuania, you got a bunch of tiny Estonia, bunch of other countries that make up the Soviet Union as well. And so they saw that Eastern Europe was breaking free, and they said, we want our independence as well. So these various ethnic groups start to rebel, and they start to break free and form their own government as well. in their own country. And the Soviet Union is going to break apart into 15 new countries. All right, Russia is included in that list. And there's the list if you really, really were interested on all the countries that the Soviet Union is going to break apart into. All right, because these various ethnic groups wanted to. So the USSR, the Soviet Union, and then after the collapse, once again, you have all these countries here. Eastern European no longer is communist, and then all these countries have broken free. Now, it hasn't been beautiful and peaceful. You've had issues in Ukraine. You've had issues where they're trying to kind of get back at it, but all these new countries are created as a result. And here's another example of the USSR sinking, and all the different lifeboats that were created are the different countries. The end of Gorbachev's era in the Soviet Union. They tried to get rid of Gorbachev because they realized that the Soviet Union was flailing, that it was weakening. But it didn't work. Really, once everything started to unravel, once you started to introduce these reforms and people started breaking free, then the republic started breaking free. They're like, whoa, we got to stop this. We got to cling to power. And it just didn't work. Gorbachev is eventually going to resign on Christmas Day, 1991. In his last act, they're going to dissolve the Soviet Union, which is no more. Boris Yeltsin will become the president of Russia. He's going to institute a free market economy. And this is going to mark the end of the Soviet Union, one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. Now, that doesn't mean everything's great. We still have issues with Russia. We've got a guy after him came into power. His name's Vladimir Putin. He was not supposed to stay in power. He came in power, I think, in 1999. He's still in power. All right, so we still have some issues with Russia. He was a former Soviet KGB agent. Putin was, and so we still have some issues with Russia, but it has gotten obviously significantly better from what it was. But this event, when they broke apart and instituted democratic policies, this really is what marked the end of the Cold War.